Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Webdelics podcast, where we're on a journey to find out the truth about plant medicines, get rid of the myths, and change the narrative. I'm your host, Scott Mason, and with us today are two guests, Marcus Glennon and Lois Koffi. Marcus is undertaking a PhD in psychopharmacology and neuroimaging with University College in London. He is a member of the Unity Project team, which investigates the neuroplasticity-inducing effects of psychedelic drugs. And Marcus, I gotta say, I cannot believe I just got all those words out of my mouth. I'm so impressed with myself. Thank you.
Job.
Lois is a sales and lifestyle coach who focuses on success mindset, work-life balance, time and stress management, and who considers herself a change maker and catalyst for transformation in mind, body, and spirit. She's also a professional speaker and the host of the Healthy and Wealthy and Wise podcast. Marcus and Lois, welcome to the show.
So good to be here.
We are... it is a delight to have you. And Lois, I love anyone that just gives her little welcome back with a sing-song. I just keep that up. It's adorable. Now, let's talk a little bit about today's episode. We're going to have a basic primer on the most common plant medicines, what they each do, and why it's so important that people who are in need know about them. We want to get an understanding of what a psychedelic experience is really like. Because, look, I've only heard about it. I've never actually experienced it. And I'm sure a lot of folks listening to this or watching it are in the exact same position. And then I would like to explore that a little bit from a scientific perspective and from a real person who's been through a lot in life and who's really been helped. So thank you both in advance for coming here and sharing this. Marcus, we're actually going to start with you because I really think that having an understanding of the scientific grounding behind plant medicine and psychedelics will help give meaning to what Lois has to say about her own experiences. And for those who are listening or watching, this is going to be a powerful episode. So I think that really laying this groundwork down well is going to be really enhancing it and giving this this story that we have to share today all of the meaning that it deserves. Marcus, when I read your intro, you had all of these fancy words that I'm super impressed by in your bio. But I'm not 100% sure I know what they mean. I know I'm impressed by them, but what exactly is it that you do? But if you could explain it in simple terms, my little mind can wrap itself around.
Sure. So I'm involved in the Unity Project, which stands for Understanding the Neuroplasticity Induced by Tryptamines. So basically, neuroplasticity is the ability of the brain to change and adapt in response to new information. And it's thought that tryptamines, which is a class of psychedelic drug, enhance neuroplasticity. So what we're trying to do is capture that phenomenon, basically. I hope that all makes sense.
It does, and thank you for...
And we have various ways of doing so.
Yeah, thank you. That actually does make it sense, and I appreciate that. So let's just get to the point. We are talking about psychedelics throughout the run of this podcast, and I hear all of these fancy names to describe the various medicines in the various conversations that I'm having with people or reading about online or wherever. But I won't lie. They and what they do all become kind of a blur sometimes. I feel like I'm having a trip just reading it. And so what are the main types of plant medicines / psychedelics that are being studied exactly? And how do you pronounce these names? Like ayahuasca, am I even saying that right? Ayahuasca? Psilocybin? Please, help.
Sure. So, well, there are a lot of them, but the main ones being studied are psilocybin, like you said. That is the main one by far. That's being used for all sorts, which in psilocybin is the term for magic mushrooms. It's the same thing.
Thank you.
Ayahuasca, like you said, is another one. The main ingredient of which, the main psychoactive component of which is DMT, which is the drug that my research group is interested in. LSD is another one. I'm sure we've all heard of that.
Yeah.
And ibogaine is another one that's being used for addiction. So they are some of the main ones, especially psilocybin. There are also things like MDMA and cannabinoids, which don't quite fall under the same umbrella, but they're being used for various things as well.
Right. So perhaps we'll focus on the 4 that you listed right up front, and then maybe we'll briefly touch on MDMA. Anything that's related to cannabis we're not really talking about today, but we may touch on as a side matter. But what do each of those 4 main psychedelic drugs, as well as MDMA, do?
What do they do? Well, I guess in essence, they produce a very strong change in your conscious state. So they massively change your perception and mood and just your general cognition and how you think. In terms of what they do to the brain, that's a very big question. So if you picture a normal brain, you have some regions that talk to some regions, but not others. So you might have region A that communicates with region B, but never with region C. What psychedelics appear to do is break down this system of inhibition, thereby allowing more regions to communicate with each other. So you get more communication across the brain. That's the biggest theory at the moment in what they do to the brain, and that corresponds very well with the psychological effects of these drugs, which is just changing the way you think.
Now, this sounds both compelling and terrifying. And compelling because I see, quite obviously based on what you just said, why if different parts of the brains that weren't communicating before are suddenly communicating, there would be an experience of mind expansion. And Lois, we're going to talk a little bit more about what that mind expansion looks like when we get to you. And we're going to talk about it a little bit with you too, Marcus. But I have to ask myself inside, if evolution or the creator or whatever you believe caused us to have brain communication occurring the way it is, had wanted these communications to be occurring in the areas of the brain that they're not communicating in now, who are we to screw around with it? Is that something that we should be concerned about, that we're literally rejiggering the hardwiring of the brain in a fundamental way to create things that weren't there in the first place?
Yeah, that's an interesting way of looking at it. Yeah, I think you're right. It's these substances cannot be messed with. You know, these are very powerful substances that have their dangers. They're shown to be more safe than we think, but they do have their dangers. And you're right. These can't be trifled with. They can't be taken lightly.
But at the same time, it's interesting you continually use the word power. And so let's talk about the power that these have for a second. What do they really do then from the perspective, and again, Lois, we're going to talk a little bit about the lived experience, but from a scientific perspective, what do they do in terms of the outcomes that they can lead to once these new communications start for people who may or may not be in need? I mean, we've been focusing a lot on mental health crisis situations that are occurring throughout the Western world, drug abuse or depression, suicide, all of these sorts of things. How is it that this extra communication can help with that? And are there ways that extra communication can also help people that might not have specific emotional challenges that they're going through?
Yeah, that's a good point. So some studies are looking at patient populations, so those who are thought to need this kind of help, and some are just looking at healthy people, and they're looking at changes in well-being after these substances. So a lot of people, if they use these substances correctly in a clinical setting with the right guidance, they very frequently and consistently report increases in well-being over the course of the next few months, and that is a maintained increase. People seem to have changed perspectives from these experiences, and they frequently report it to be one of the top 3 most powerful experiences of their life.
Wow.
And that's after just one session on these drugs. They're very powerful.
When you talk about well-being, I think I understand what that means in terms of those that might be suffering things like from depression or post-traumatic stress disorder, if their symptoms are being reduced, then I would imagine that translates into well-being. Now, with regards to people that are not suffering from disorders, what does well-being mean from their perspective? Hey, I'm a happy guy most of the time. But like, would these be able to somehow help me be even happier? Oh, heaven forbid. I don't know if the world can handle that, but answer my question.
Perhaps, yeah. So well-being, I guess it just refers to just someone's general mood and general stability. And even amongst those who aren't necessarily depressed or anxious or traumatized, there's often still room for improvement, and it is thought that perhaps these substances can help people realize that.
Understood.
And can grow upon that.
Amazing. Hey, look, all joking aside, there's always room to feel better in life. There really is. We only live it once. At least we only live it once in this body having this particular experience. Now, are all of these medicines hallucinogens? And if not, what is the difference? Which ones aren't, and how are they still psychedelics if they're not hallucinogens and all that sort of stuff?
That's a good question. So the ones I've been talking about are hallucinogens, but there seems to be some variation in how the term psychedelic is used. So there's classical psychedelic, which are the ones I've been talking about, very potent drugs like psilocybin, LSD. And then there are things like MDMA, which is still a psychedelic, but it is not as powerfully hallucinogenic as the others. It's more of a stimulant, so it will give you increased heart rates and increased feelings of alertness, awareness, and things. But most of the ones we are talking about are powerfully hallucinogenic.
And from a scientific perspective, what is a hallucination? And is that the same thing as a trip?
Well, hallucination is part of a trip, I would say. In terms of what a trip is, that's a very big question. And again, it's one that the scientific community is having trouble defining. So a trip may consist of hallucinations, like you said, mystical experiences, another thing that's very hard to define, a blissful state or an anxious state, or perhaps even a loss of your sense of self. Some people often report that. But there's so much variation in what people report on these trips, which is why it makes it so hard to pin down. And also, people often say that these experiences are ineffable, which literally means you cannot describe it in words. So it's very hard to define.
Right. Is there a way to image the brain or to monitor brain activity so that we can have any sort of objective sense as to whether someone is going through a trip or not? Or do you rely on self-reporting from people that are being studied to determine whether they've actually tripped or not?
Well, this is something, that's a big question in the literature. We have to use questionnaires, basically, to assess what people experienced when they were administered with psychedelics. But at the same time, we can use brain imaging, and we can try and map the results from their questionnaires and self-report measures to the brain activity that we see. And then hopefully, like you said, we can get a more objective view of what a trip consists of. And we can map it to the subjective responses of participants.
It's funny because when I was growing up, I knew about trips in one context. When my cousins said something sassy to me, I'd look at them, give them a stink eye, and say, "You people are tripping." And that's all I knew. It was just a word that I used that had a negative association. Now, I won't lie. I saw movies too when I was growing up, usually horror movies, and they're often made in the 70s, where people would have these experiences where there'd be all sorts of weird lights around. I remember there was this movie called Rosemary's Baby where it seemed like she was going on a trip and she was being attacked by a demon in a boat. And so that's what I associated these things with. And then later people's minds being fried. This seems to directly contradict the vision that you're describing of what a trip can or is possible to be. So is there a difference between a good trip and a bad trip from a scientific perspective? What do we know about that as a matter of science? Or are these trips that I saw on Hollywood movies all just made up stuff? Hollywood invents stuff. I'm not going to deny that.
Yeah, it's a good question. The psychological effects of a trip are, it's nuanced, and the dangers of these substances, it's a complicated thing. So, like I said before, physically, these drugs are very safe if you take them without other drugs and at a recommended dose. But psychologically, it's a bit more difficult. So, in people who have a vulnerability to psychiatric disorders, they might have a bad time. They might have an unpleasant and anxious experience, which brings up a lot of stuff that's quite difficult to deal with. But in those who are properly screened and assessed, and that when it's made sure that they have no predisposition to this kind of thing, generally the reports are very positive, and people have very positive experiences. And your brain won't be fried, and it won't change your DNA or anything like that.
That's what I'm afraid of. I don't want to wake up. I don't want to wake up with my DNA changed. That's scary.
It's been a big scary campaign over the past few decades, but we're learning now that they're not as bad as we first thought. That doesn't mean they are completely safe, and they can be trifled with. You've got to be careful, but they're okay.
That being said, particularly with regards to the mental health crisis that is being faced by people throughout the Western world, is it really just another drug that we are looking to commodify and bring out into the market so that we just have one more thing for the pharmaceutical industry to sell? You're laughing because you know why I'm asking this. I ain't the only one who's thinking it. Please.
Yeah, of course. Well, I mean, you could be right. Maybe that's how this will end up. I guess time will tell. I think people in the research, people in this world, hope it is something different, and hope that this is a chance to take a very different approach to mental health, a more holistic approach, combined with support and therapy and everything like that. This probably won't be just, a one-time drug you take or a prescription over a counter. This is a more complicated and delicate thing.
That is really then talking about a new paradigm of medicinal treatment, right? Because we have talk therapy now, and that can be combined with some drugs, but this is not really the same sort of regimen as these other drugs, and they certainly don't have the same effect as some of these other drugs have. So we're also creating a new way of viewing how mental health is being treated. That, to me, is exciting. Am I overreading here?
It is very exciting. It's incredibly exciting. I think we have to be careful. We have to take a step back and make sure the science comes first, and that these drugs are definitely safe and that they work for everyone. But you're right. This is a very exciting concept.
What are the tests that are being conducted? What do they look like to a lay person? Can you describe what clinical trials or whatever just look like?
Yeah, so some of them, like I said, most of them are looking at psilocybin. So they would give psilocybin to someone with depression, for example, and they'll have another group of depressed patients who they just give a placebo dose to. So a placebo is a fake drug. It doesn't contain any psilocybin or anything. It's just a pill of sugar. And they will compare who gets better, basically. And it is thought that the psilocybin group will get better, much better, than the placebo group, if that makes sense. And they'll also be comparing psilocybin to existing antidepressant treatments.
Marcus, how on earth did a clean-cut, nicely shaved young man like you get into science and end up in this world of all places? I'm imagining you with all sorts of hair and dreadlocks and everything, and look at you. There's got to be a story here.
15 years ago, this would have been career suicide, but now it's the next big thing in science.
I love it. And so are you telling me that you're in this a lot of, to some extent at least, because this is a frontier area of study, and that itself is worth being involved in from your perspective?
Very much so, yeah. So whether this pans out well or not, this is a frontier of science. It's cutting edge, and it is fascinating. I think we can all agree on that.
Yeah.
That's my reasoning for getting
involved. It truly is. And that is the perfect segue for us to start talking a little bit more to Lois. Lois, you got involved in the psychedelics world due to a very different set of circumstances. Would you mind sharing with us exactly a little bit about your journey into psychedelics?
Yeah, so grateful, so honored. It was definitely mental health and spiritual related. In 2020, I was kind of in the, like I think a lot of us, in a wake up call, and mine was a little more intense because I had just moved across country. I was struggling in my marriage. I actually had multiple friends commit suicide. One of them actually did it just before the pandemic started, and she was like a mentee to me. And then my brother dropped dead of alcoholism in February of 2020. And then my mom, who I lost twice, once as a kid because she was a schizophrenic, and so she was taken from me at the age of 4. And then she died right after my brother. And then we had this thing called shelter in place, pandemic style, having to homeschool our 7 and 11-year-old. And at that time, I was a binge drinking workaholic. I didn't realize how much I hated myself, how much I was really, hating life, and was so far removed from my purpose that, my dad had died in 2018 as well. That was kind of like the beginning of my numbing out phase. And before that, I was a Ironman triathlete, overachieving, type of person, successful, and all of those things. But I was so numb. And so in 2020, when I was really struggling to find, how do I build this online business? How do I, save my marriage? How do I do all these things? I had a coach who had me read the book, The Surrender Experiment. And this guy was talking about going inward. Book. I know, right? Yeah. The funny part, though, is it pissed me off. Because the guy in the whole book was talking about, being a yogi, being a hippie, and just meditating all the time. And he became a multi-millionaire. And I was like, what? Yeah. I thought I was sold a bill of goods, this American dream. You got to work hard for your money, and you got to fake it till you make it, and you got to suck it up, buttercup, and all these things that, I gleaned as a child from society. My parents, thanks to plant medicine, I also discovered my ancestors, and all of that kind of stuff. And it helped wake me up. Go ahead. Yeah,
I'm sorry. I don't want to interrupt here, but before we walk down a little bit too deeply into where you went, and we're going to dive deeply there. Make no mistake. But I want to just make sure I heard you right earlier, because this is almost incomprehensible to me. 2020, you have not one, but multiple suicides in your life. You have a brother who dies. You have deeper loss. You have additional losses. Part of why I don't want to dwell on tragedy, but I also don't want to just slide by. This is reality. This is what we're talking about. We're talking about someone that was successful, and then all of a sudden, in very short order, with shelter in place and a troubled marriage on top of it all of a sudden your life is shattered. And this is like war zone stuff that happens to someone in a short order of time. Talk to me a little bit about you're feeling empty. That seems to me like it would be a bit of an understatement. I'm trying to wrap my mind around how I would feel if that were me. I can't even begin to touch it. Explain where you were at psychologically, a little bit more detail so folks don't really understand this.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, it was. I would not want to go through it again. I
can't even. Yeah.
I was so numb that I just was on the hamster wheel of just keep going. Just so you guys know, like in the moment, that's how numb I was. Like I had a psychotherapist and a grief counselor, and both of them were like you, and I because of childhood trauma, that again, the plant medicines, the greatest teachers of all time, helped me recognize I wasn't, like the lights were on, but no one was home. That's how numb I was.
No, so sorry.
And when I read the Grief Recovery Handbook, it actually woke me up to, I only saw death as grief, and then I looked at my life, and I think everyone has been through a lot, especially since the pandemic, but I looked at all the life events that are considered loss, and I was like, that's why the surrender experiment, I had my white flag out and realizing I can't fake it anymore. I can't hold on and stuff down the pain anymore. I'm gonna die. That was what I saw as my wake-up call. And I will say, bless their hearts, the talk therapy and the grief counseling actually only made it worse. I only wanted to drink more. So that's when I found a spiritual mentor who I introduced you to, Franco, who said, Lois, you're stuck in your brain. To Marcus's point, you're stuck in that analytical masculine energy side of your brain, the left hemisphere. You got to go inside, and probably the only way that you can, and this is a big thing for him to say, because he had never done ayahuasca or psilocybin, was to go and find some ayahuasca and psilocybin. And I was so broken and so devastated, and I was just like, okay, I've never done drugs, I've never even smoked a cigarette in my life, but I'm just so open.
Well, and that is an important point to raise, because a lot of folks who are listening to this or who may be watching it on YouTube may say, whoa, these are people, I assume, that have smoked pot or that are experimental in their approach in life or maybe hippy-dippy already. And I really want to go back to what you do professionally for a minute, because you're in a mainline career. Right, you're a sales coach. Sales has been your entire professional background, even before you were a coach. Mm-hmm. And so it's not like you're someone who was doing psychedelic rock or were, some sort of marginal profession. This was mainline for you. Excuse me.
Yeah, for sure. It never, ever would have occurred to me. And I'm here to tell you, it changed my life so much that I'm becoming a medicine woman, and my husband's becoming a shaman. It saved our marriage. I've lost 30 pounds. I have a healthy relationship with alcohol. My kids now, they have a new mom, so I felt like a worthless mother. I had so much shame and loss and not enoughness. So those are just like the flip side. And so now, like with my coaching, I call myself a transformational sales coach now, because I recognize I could give you all the lead generation strategies and tactics in the world. However, a lot of my clients were stuck in their left side of their brain too, and I saw it: self-sabotage, limiting beliefs, and I had even hired a subconscious mind coach to help me.
Wow, I didn't even know all these types of coaches exist. Wow.
Yeah, but I was so stuck and so numb that wasn't enough for me. The medicines really became my best teachers and coaches.
So what happened when you start using them, and what drugs? I know you mentioned one in particular. What drugs did you use? Talk to us a little bit about your journey into that world and what happened.
Yeah, so it's a lot. I've done over 30 plant medicine journeys, and with all due respect to you, Marcus, I personally would never do it in a clinical setting. The shamans and the healers and the teachers, coming from a deeply, indigenous culture of training and teaching. I mean, psilocybin's been here longer than all of us, right? So they have so much wisdom, and the shamans who grow them, that was one of my first journeys, was a shaman who actually grows psilocybin. Went on a walk, shamanic walk with him, microdosing, to just start to open with psilocybin microdosing, just to open my mind and my heart, connecting the head and the heart together. To me, there's more depth and knowledge, understanding. We have 3 brains in our body. The one here is super cool, but guess what? The heart is known as the larger brain, 40,000 neurons. And that's where I had this brick wall of pain, loss, grief, not enoughness, stuckness. I had this brick wall around my heart. Even the walk in nature, I felt disconnected,
Wow.
to be totally frank with you.
Wow.
Then I found a group that specializes in heart opening medicine. So none of the ones we've talked about here necessarily, but sassafras, white lily. In that first journey, I cried my eyes out, and I felt my heart for the first time probably in a decade, maybe two. And I saw images of my childhood. I connected deeply with my my hometown, and I saw the goodness in it. Thankfully, those first several journeys were very loving, very peace-filled. Started opening up my heart, and the first psilocybin one was fantastic because and I probably will cry here, but I could actually feel my brother there, and I could smell him.
Oh my God.
And I got to see his pain. I got to go back to his childhood. And I got to connect with him. And he showed me things that gave me so much love. So much compassion. No therapist could do that. No grief counselor could do that. That was the psilocybin. It was so magical, and that's just one of many, many stories. And by far, I'm grateful to the heart openers for helping open my heart. But the best experiences are definitely psilocybin and ayahuasca by far.
Lois, thank you so much. I'm really feeling what you said, and I won't lie. If I were in the same room as you right now, I'd give you a hug. I think it's important for people to hear that and to really feel these emotions the way I'm feeling it right now, because we're talking about reality here. The science matters, but so do the feelings. So do the changes that can happen. I spent too much of my own life emotionally walled off. Now, I didn't experience it as disconnect as much as rage, just as being in this constant state of rage. But hearing this connection that you have with yourself, with love, that would have been an almost indescribable experience for someone like me. And I think about so many people out there that are suffering now for a whole host of reasons, that might feel disconnected or might feel walled in or might feel like there's no reason to live at all. And you sharing this might have just given someone some hope. You talked on this a minute ago briefly before I stepped in and sidetracked us. Lois, how has this helped you?
Oh gosh, do we have like an hour left? Well, first thing first, I'll share a couple other trips that really were profound that will help me explain deeper, because I think the stories, as I say in sales, facts tell, but stories sell, right?
Yeah.
So another one of my journeys that was really, really powerful was actually a couple's journey with my husband, just me and him. Remember I said, well, I didn't say this specifically, but at the beginning of 2021, I thought I was going to end the year divorced.
Oh.
And I felt like a worthless mom and all of the things.
Yeah.
And what we experienced in that journey is he actually, doing the same medicine, he saw me differently. And he made peace in a lot of ways with his ex-wife, which, was impacting our marriage, right? Him not forgiving and letting go of the past, which is always, we carry the past with us wherever we go, like a big suitcase sometimes of trauma and wounds. And he just it helped him better understand himself and us. Yeah. And in the same journey, I actually had a vision of my purpose. So simultaneously, these things were happening together. And in my purpose, all of my friends who committed suicide, I've had 10. So that's a lot.
What?
I've
10?
had
10?
Yeah. Yeah. But this is the beauty of it. I had people saying, "Whoa, Lois, that's really hard. Like, why is that happening?" And I'll be honest with you, I'm like, what am I attracting here? What? I don't get it. It was really hard and scary, right? Because I've also lost friends to alcoholism and all of the addictions, right? And
I can't even comprehend.
yeah,
Just continue. All I have to do is just express my jaw on the floor.
Well, this is what the plant medicine taught me, though. All of them came to me. Then my dad was there, my brother was there, even famous people who died of overdoses like Prince, Chris Cornell, Lincoln Park, Robin Williams, rest in peace, all of them. They all came to me and said, there's a reason that you cried so much when we died. There's a reason that you're still here, because I think I was headed towards a similar path. To be quite frank with you, I had many suicidal thoughts and many, moments, right? And they said, we want you to be our voice. We want you to carry on what we couldn't do, which was healing our hearts, healing ourselves, healing the mother wound, the father wound, the not enough wound, the ancestral wounds. These are all the benefits of the plant medicine, by the way. I got to work and look at all of those wounds that I was carrying that was over time wearing me down to a point where I was stuck in my head, not my heart. And so they came to me, and they've come to me multiple journeys. That was just one of several where they came to me and said, you're doing great. We're so grateful for you. Keep going. Atta girl. And so when I have those experiences, it's just a reaffirmation of why I'm here. So I found my purpose. I renewed my passion for life. My marriage is, we're changing and evolving. He's going to become a shaman in his own right. He's, from Africa. He's been denying his truth. He became a ghost whisperer. So he talks to the dead and has this new career blooming. Myself as well. I'm starting to shift more into being a spiritual, sales coach and helping people find their purpose and a renewed passion for life, because that's how you show up in the world is what's going on inside. And so to be able to have that transformation instead of just focusing on tactics and, the latest and greatest landing page and all of the things that a lot of people think are important really don't matter. Truly. We're heading into a new world. I don't know if you want to go to talk about the 5D ascension, but I've been shown a lot of things by the plant medicine teachers about this new world that we're birthing, and it's just given me so much more excitement. I don't look outside me anymore for all the answers. I don't freak out, and with all due respect, I'm not wanting to sound crass or anything, but like when Roe v. Wade happened for us, when all of these things happen, a new strain of COVID happened for us, I'm not in that victim mentality anymore. Like, oh, the world's going to hell. And no, the world is beautiful. And we just got to look inside for the answers and go deeper within. So if I can inspire that and help save lives and prevent suicides and help people who, like me, had a schizophrenic mother who got to be just labeled and thrown into the system. My brother, who is an alcoholic, he had so much pain and such a big heart. He didn't know how to be in this world. I want to be able to help people like that and give back from my own experiences.
Marcus, I'm going to turn the conversation back over to you. As a scientist, what are you hearing?
Like you said, I think this is what you said, facts tell, but the stories sell, right? And it's very true. Like, that's an incredible story, and thank you for sharing. Stories like that are why we do what we do. And we just hope that stories like that can apply to more people and help more people. So, yeah, it's incredible.
I have one more important thing to share. I'm so sorry. This is really important. Can I share one more thing?
Yes.
Okay. Because I also got sidetracked. There was one journey that was, as you would call it, as you were mentioning earlier, I never looked at it this way, but a bad trip, right? And this is also why please don't do plant medicines on your own. and finding the right groups. Because I also, found some not so great groups and this, that, and the other that, it was a journey. I could tell you the good and the bad and the ugly. We don't have enough time. However, one of the trips that I had was 6 hours of hell. And remember, a lot of what, at least in America, I don't know what it's like in the UK for you, Marcus. However, in America, it's all about put on a happy face, think and grow rich, fake it till you make it. You're fine. Don't talk about your problems. How are you? I'm fine. How are you? I'm fine. So we've been programmed to not focus on what I'm now helping my clients do, which is the shadow work. And what I realized was that night of hell, 6 hours of me beating the crap out of myself. It was all of my negative judgments. It was all of my shame. Before that, all of my journeys were positive, really powerful, deep, lots of tears, lots of healing, lots of love. I was so grateful for this one, though, because when I woke up the next morning and I talked to the facilitator, again, had I been doing that on my own, God only knows what I would have done, right? Because it was intense. Yeah. And they held my hand and they said, it sounds like you don't know how to have compassion and love for yourself. And I was like, what? And she was right. My, that reptilian part of our brain, that fear, that shame, that not enoughness was teaching me something. My shadows were coming out and I had been so numb. I'd been drinking over them, working over them, and ignoring them because I thought, I'll just say my affirmations every day. I'll just read Think and Grow Rich for the 5,000th time and everything's going to be okay, right?
Yeah.
But if you study Buddhism, if you study all of the great truths about those teachings, you gotta go through fear, shame, jealousy, anger, and really feel them and learn how to love yourself. That's part of our human existence. And if you don't, that's when suicide happens. That's when alcoholism happens. That's when medicating your medications happens. That's when throwing into your work and that's all you have in your life happens. And you're not authentic. You're not real. And people can smell that BS from a mile away. And so that was, even though it was the scariest one, and I would hope not to ever have that happen again, and it hasn't, by the way, that was my greatest teacher from the standpoint of learning self-compassion and self-love, and the real, truest, deepest healing started to take place because I didn't realize how much I really judged myself and had a lot of shame.
It also answers an earlier question that I had to Marcus in a very different way. That is, what is a trip? What you've described is a psychological, emotional, and spiritual journey. Literally a trip. My takeaway from you, Lois, is that life can put us in some pretty desperate situations, and sometimes it can be utterly overwhelming. It can even lead to us wanting to end it all. I'm hearing that psychedelics and plant medicine saved your life. I'm hearing that it gave your life meaning. I'm hearing that it gave you a chance to begin to move on in a way that everything that you tried before, coaches, therapists, all of this sort of stuff, couldn't even begin to touch. And I'm also definitely hearing, due to the rawness of what you shared, someone who is connected with who she is when you hadn't been before. Marcus, I'm hearing from you that this is frontier medicine and scientific work that could do the sort of thing that I've heard Lois describe over and over again, multiplied out in a world that needs it, and with a variety of different plant modalities that people can apply that are being tested for their safety, that are going through the scientific rigors, that are being explored from a brain perspective so we understand what's happening and then can apply it across the board. This has been an amazing episode, and I thank you both from the bottom of my heart for this. It has been a pleasure having both of you on the show, and your wisdom, your knowledge, and your feelings have been everything. Everything. Now, for those of you who are listening or watching, please keep tuning in. In upcoming episodes, we're going to be discussing social concerns related to psychedelics, their relationship with everything from religion to race politics, at least in the United States. We'll discuss the history of psychedelics and the truth about why regular people like you and me don't know more about them. We're also going to continually discuss one of the most important topics of all, safety. Now, before we completely close out the episode, Marcus and Lois, I'd like for both of you to take a quick second to let people know how they can find out more about you, because after hearing what both of you have had to say, it's impossible for me to imagine that the audience won't want to learn more about you. So where can we find you, Marcus?
I am on Twitter, so we can put a link for that.
In the show notes,
somewhere,
they're definitely going to be there, yes.
So if you want to... Oh, great. Okay. And if you want to learn more about the project that I'm taking part in, I can put a link for that as well. We're hoping to do some fundraising for the project and get some money in. So, yeah, keep your eyes peeled for that.
Thank you, Marcus. Lois?
I would love to have you on my show, Marcus, and we'll do some fundraising together, okay? For me, loiskoffi.com, so LOISKOFFI.com, and probably the best way to connect with me is follow my podcast. Scott's been on there. I have my Suicide Awareness Month coming up in September, healthyandwealthyandwise.com, or just go to loiskoffi.com/podcast. As I've transformed, I just rebirthed my podcast, and I'm going to be having a lot more spiritual transformative conversations on my show, so I'd love to see you there.
Absolutely love it. If you enjoyed today's episode and want to learn more, be sure to subscribe, leave a review or a comment if it's on YouTube, and tell the folks you care about what we're doing. Also, don't forget to follow Webdelics on Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. And be sure to check out our website, webdelics.com. That's WEBDELICS.com. And sign up to get our blog for trusted educational information about plant medicine and psychedelics. Then join us next time for another episode of the Webdelics podcast.